At 6:42 a.m., Flight 782 had just reached cruising altitude, 30,000 feet above a patchwork of mountains and rivers that glimmered under the early sun. The Boeing 737 hummed steadily, its engines a comforting drone that filled the cabin with a sense of routine. Passengers settled in their seats, some scrolling through phones, others sipping lukewarm coffee from plastic cups, while a few napped, lulled by the vibration of the massive jet slicing through the sky. Captain Lisa Morno, 42, sat in the cockpit with impeccable posture, her dark brown eyes scanning the instruments with the focus of a seasoned professional. She had flown thousands of hours over the continental United States, through storms and turbulence, and had learned to read a plane's mood as if it were a living being. Her co-pilot, a younger man named Derek Shaw, was reviewing the flight path and fuel charts, unaware of the storm that was about to erupt, not in the weather, but inside the very systems he trusted. Meanwhile, 11-year-old Sophie Callahan, seated near the emergency exit, clutched her tablet and sketchbook. Her fingers flew over the page as she drew fighter jets and strange aircraft in impossible formations, her imagination stretching beyond what any child her age should contemplate. She had been fascinated by airplanes since her father, a retired Air Force engineer, had brought her to airshows. She could name every jet in the U.S. fleet and knew the call signs of most active military aircraft. But today, Sophie's curiosity would be tested in ways she had never imagined. Flight attendants moved down the aisles, offering coffee refills and pastries. One young attendant, Marissa, paused when she saw Sophie's intense gaze on her tablet. The girl wasn't playing a game, she was studying something. Marissa shrugged and moved on, unaware of the tiny storm brewing in the seat just behind her. In the cockpit, Morno ran through her checklist with mechanical precision. Altimeter steady, heading on course. Systems normal, she murmured, tapping buttons and scanning dials. Derek Shaw nodded, his eyes flicking between screens. Everything was routine, too routine. A subtle unease pricked the back of Morno's neck, but she dismissed it. Pilots learn to trust instruments, she told herself. Instinct can be a trap. Then, without warning, the calm broke. A sudden silence filled the cockpit. The radios, which usually buzzed with the static of distant ATC chatter, fell dead. Morno frowned, pressing the transmit button. Tower, Flight 782, do you copy? There was nothing, just silence. Her stomach tightened. Derek, check all comm channels, she said. Derek's hands flew over the panel, toggling knobs, flipping switches, but nothing responded. The autopilot continued humming, keeping the plane level and on course, but the human connection, the lifeline to the world below, had vanished. Back in the cabin, passengers began to notice the change. A businessman looked around nervously, noticing that the usual overhead announcements were missing. A mother clutched her child, whispering reassurances that sounded hollow even to her own ears. The hum of conversation and laughter vanished, replaced by a tense, uneasy quiet. Even the gentle sway of the plane seemed different, sharper, almost aware. Sophie felt it first, a prickling awareness that something was wrong. She leaned over her sketchbook, but this time her drawings were different. Lines of code, flight paths, and abstract symbols appeared on the page, instinctively flowing from her fingers. It wasn't just art, it was a map, a solution, a warning. She tapped at her tablet, sending out a series of encrypted signals she had learned from her father's old tutorials. It wasn't a game anymore, it was a lifeline. Marissa, walking past, noticed Sophie's intensity. "Honey, is everything okay?" she asked softly. Sophie didn't look up, her lips moving in a silent chant, almost like a prayer. "Something's wrong," she whispered to herself, barely audible. Marissa frowned but moved on. Most adults would have dismissed it as a child being dramatic, but Sophie's eyes burned with a calm clarity that hinted at something extraordinary. In the cockpit, Morno's unease escalated. She flicked through the screens, scanning for anomalies. Instruments showed normal readings, altitude stable, speed steady, engines functioning. Yet the silence gnawed at her. "Derek, are we actually in control here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek shook his head. "Everything looks fine, but Why is there no contact with ATC? Suddenly the plane shuddered lightly, a subtle vibration that made even seasoned pilots tense. Morno's hand tightened on the yoke. "Something's not right," she said. The autopilot responded, adjusting minutely to compensate, but the adjustment felt delayed, hesitant, almost human. Meanwhile, Sophie's tablet pinged softly. She leaned closer, reading the encrypted feedback from the signals she had just sent. Her eyes widened. Someone or something was listening. Far above the clouds, high-speed military jets had picked up her unique call sign, one she had never expected to reach anyone. The signal, tiny and almost undetectable, had traveled beyond civilian detection systems, straight to a pair of F-22s on a routine patrol. High above the Rockies, Lieutenant Jackson Hayes and his wingman stared at the screen in disbelief. "Ghost Hawk 11, Hayes muttered, a chill running down his spine. That call sign was classified. It was a code he had only read about in secure briefings, something used in top-secret programs designed for elite pilots, and now it had come from a child. Back in the cabin, Sophie glanced at her mother, who had been silently watching her. "Mom, listen," she said quietly. "I know what to do." Her mother's eyes widened, a mix of fear and disbelief. Sophie was just a girl, yet in her small hands rested the fate of everyone on Flight 782. Morno felt it too, the inexplicable calm of someone who knew exactly what to do. She had flown countless emergencies, but none like this. She glanced at Derek. "We might need outside help," she murmured. Derek's pale face mirrored her fear. "From who?" he asked. And then they both heard it. A distant ping over the comms, faint but unmistakable, a recognition of Sophie's call sign by an unknown authority. Passengers sensed the tension rising. A young boy clutched his mother, a man's knuckles whitened on the armrest, a woman's breath came shallow and fast. The plane was a vessel of fear and curiosity, caught between routine and catastrophe. Sophie, however, didn't panic. Her fingers danced over the tablet, her mind weaving through the complex systems as if they were puzzles she had solved 1,000 times. The hum of the engines and the slight turbulence no longer frightened her. She was calm, focused, ready. And far above, the F-22s froze, their pilots staring at their screens. A child's call sign, the Ghost Hawk 11, had reached them, and for the first time in their lives, they realized they were witnessing something beyond comprehension. Morno's voice cut through the cockpit, steady but strained. "Whatever is happening, we need to stay in control. Hold it steady." Her eyes flicked to Sophie, seated in the back, her small frame hunched over her tablet. Could a child really be guiding them through this silent nightmare? The thought was absurd, impossible. Yet the signals, the pings, the strange recognition from the F-22s told a different story. The plane continued its journey, cruising silently at 30,000 feet, as if the world below had ceased to exist. And in that eerie, tense quiet, one fact became undeniable. Something extraordinary was unfolding, and Flight 782 was no longer just a plane. It was a stage for an unimaginable test of courage, instinct, and intelligence. And Sophie's voice, small but unshakable, whispered into the silence, "We're not alone, and they're listening." The autopilot hummed. The engines roared softly. The passengers, oblivious to the full gravity of the moment, adjusted in their seats. But in the cockpit in the back of the cabin, and high above in the F-22s, every heartbeat was synchronized in suspense, waiting for the storm to truly begin. The cabin of Flight 782 had settled into an eerie calm, broken only by the occasional murmur or the soft hum of the engines. Yet beneath that calm, tension coiled like a spring ready to snap. Passengers began to exchange uneasy glances, noting the absence of announcements, the unnatural quiet of a flight that should have been routine. Even the gentle swish of drinks in cups seemed amplified against the suffocating silence. Sophie's mother, Claire Callahan, noticed her daughter's unwavering focus. "Sophie, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sophie didn't look up. Her small fingers moved over the tablet with deliberate precision, her eyes scanning lines of text, numbers, and codes only she could understand. She whispered under her breath, "They're listening, we have to let them know." In the cockpit, Morno's unease deepened. The radio remained dead. "Derek, check frequencies again. Try all emergency channels," she commanded. Derek Shaw flipped switches, rotated dials, and tapped buttons, but each effort returned the same result: silence. Not even static. It was as if the plane had been cut off from the world entirely. Passengers were beginning to notice. A businessman turned to the woman beside him. "Does anyone else think something's wrong?" His voice shook slightly. The woman clutched her purse tighter. I don't know," she stammered. Some children cried softly, sensing their parents' tension. The flight attendants did their best to reassure everyone, moving quietly down the aisles, but their eyes betrayed the fear they tried to mask. Sophie knew she couldn't wait. The plane's systems were stable for now, but the silence wasn't natural. Her mind raced through everything she had learned from her father's old flight manuals and online tutorials. She had memorized emergency protocols, encrypted channels, and basic autopilot functions just for fun. Now, that knowledge mattered more than anything in the world. She tapped her tablet and sent a coded signal, a message designed to catch the attention of someone who could respond, someone trained, someone who could recognize her call sign: Ghost Hawk 11. It was an old code used for clandestine military communication, meant to bypass civilian detection. She wasn't supposed to know it, but somehow instinct told her to use it now. Far above, 2 F-22s roared across the sky, their engines slicing through the thin morning air. Lieutenant Jackson Hayes and his wingman, Lieutenant Marcus Ellison, were on a routine patrol over the Rockies when an unexpected alert blinked across their displays. The call sign Ghost Hawk 11 appeared, and Hayes's stomach dropped. That designation wasn't supposed to exist outside top-secret files. Ellison leaned over, squinting at the display. "That's classified," he whispered. "No civilian aircraft should," Hayes interrupted, his voice taut. "It's coming from that Boeing 782. The radar showed a clean blip, a civilian jet perfectly on course, cruising at normal altitude. But the recognition of the call sign froze the two pilots in place. Back on the plane, Sophie's fingers flew over the tablet, sending bursts of encrypted signals into the digital ether. She didn't fully understand how it worked. She only knew that someone was listening, someone trained to respond. The autopilot adjusted slightly, subtly responding to her instructions. She leaned closer, whispering, "You have to see me. You have to know we're in trouble." Morno noticed a strange flicker on one of the cockpit screens. The autopilot seemed different, almost responsive in a way it shouldn't have been. "Derek, look at this," she said. "It's like the plane is reacting to something else, something outside our control." Derek frowned, rubbing his temple. "I don't understand. Everything reads normal, but—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The tension hung between them like a heavy fog. Passengers started murmuring nervously. One young man tried to call his office, but his phone struggled to find a signal. A mother whispered to her teenage daughter, "It's fine, just a glitch, probably." But even as she spoke, the fluttering tension in the air suggested otherwise. Something unseen had taken hold of the flight, and every instinct told the human occupants that the ordinary rules no longer applied. Sophie's mother leaned over her daughter's shoulder, anxiety warring with awe. "Sophie, what are you doing?" she asked. Sophie's gaze didn't waver. "Sending them my call sign. The grown-ups aren't answering. We need someone trained," she said softly. Claire's heart lurched. How could a child, barely able to reach the tray table, be performing a task that could save hundreds of lives? Miles above, the F-22s adjusted their formation. Hayes's jaw was tight, his mind raced. "This is impossible," he muttered. "There's a child on that plane, she's sending coded signals." Ellison's hand hovered over the radio. Do we respond?" Hayes shook his head. "Not yet. We observe. We assess. But whatever she's doing, she knows what she's doing." The plane shuddered slightly, a turbulence ripple that was almost imperceptible but enough to send a ripple of panic through the cabin. Coffee spilled. A man cursed softly under his breath. A child whimpered. Morno gripped the yoke tighter, her knuckles white. "We're stable," she said, more to reassure herself than anyone else. But her voice trembled. She could feel the subtle irregularities in the controls, the odd hesitations that didn't belong to autopilot alone. Sophie noticed it too. The plane's adjustments weren't random. They were deliberate, almost intelligent, and she realized that she wasn't just observing. She was part of it. Her mind raced through autopilot commands and minor system overrides, making split-second decisions. "Okay, left adjustment, slightly faster now," she whispered, as if the plane could hear her. And somehow it obeyed. In the cabin, Marissa, the flight attendant, noticed Sophie's calmness. She was pale but steady, a stark contrast to the panicked adults around her. She leaned down. "Honey, you're not scared?" Sophie shook her head. "I have to be, but we're not alone." Marissa frowned. "Not alone? What do you mean?" Sophie didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the window, scanning the sky in a way that suggested she already knew someone or something was out there. High above, the F-22 pilots were equally transfixed. The girl's signals were precise, almost prescient. Hayes's mind raced to understand how a child could communicate with such sophistication. Then, realization struck like lightning. The signals weren't just reaching the jets. They were guiding the plane's subtle movements, the micro-adjustments that kept Flight 782 level and steady despite the invisible forces at work. Morno's voice broke through Sophie's concentration. "Derek, look at the autopilot. It's reacting differently, like it's responding to an external input, but it shouldn't be. No one outside should have access." Derek's eyes widened. "Someone or something is in control," he whispered. Morno swallowed hard, her professional composure faltering for the first time in years. Sophie's fingers danced over her tablet, sending one final encrypted burst. She exhaled, her small chest rising and falling rapidly. "They know now," she whispered to herself. Somewhere high above, the F-22s reacted instantaneously, freezing in formation as if recognizing the impossible truth. A child had reached them. And then, just as the realization settled across the cabin, a subtle vibration rippled through the fuselage. The plane tilted slightly, enough to make passengers gasp and clutch their seats. Morno's heart leapt into her throat. Derek's hands hovered over the controls, unsure whether to intervene. Sophie looked up from her tablet, her eyes meeting her mother. "Mom, hold on. This is just the beginning." And far above the Rockies, the two F-22s remained locked in place, the pilots frozen in disbelief. A child's call sign, a simple combination of letters and numbers, had reached them through impossible odds. Hayes swallowed hard. "We're witnessing something unreal," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind rushing past the cockpit. Flight 782 continued onward, cruising silently at 30,000 feet, carrying hundreds of lives, and one extraordinary girl, toward an unfolding crisis that no one on board fully understood. And in the eerie quiet, one fact was certain. The sky was no longer empty, and the game had just begun. High above the Rockies, the roar of the F-22s, engines cut through the thin morning air like knives. Lieutenant Jackson Hayes gripped the yoke, his knuckles white, eyes locked on the blip of Flight 782 on his radar. The call sign, Ghost Hawk 11, flashed repeatedly, and with it came an impossible realization. The source was a child, a civilian child. Ellison, his wingman, broke the silence. "Jackson, are you seeing this? That's not supposed to happen. That call sign shouldn't exist." Hayes shook his head, swallowing hard. "I know, and it's coming from that Boeing. She's controlling something, somehow." Ellison's face drained of color. "A child, on a commercial plane? Are we seriously talking about a kid running autopilot commands at 30,000 feet? "Apparently," Hayes muttered, scanning the skis. They adjusted formation, moving in tighter synchronization with Flight 782, careful not to provoke the Boeing in any way. Every maneuver was calculated. One wrong move and the plane could be destabilized. "We're going in," Hayes said, determination hardening his voice. "We need eyes on the cockpit." Below in the Boeing, Sophie noticed the jets cutting across the sky, their shadows briefly flashing across the clouds beneath her window. She didn't flinch. Her fingers flew across the tablet, issuing precise commands. "I see them," she whispered to herself. "They're here, they know." Her mother, Claire, grabbed her hand. "Sophie, what are you doing?" But Sophie didn't answer. She couldn't. Every second mattered. Morno's voice cut through the cockpit with a steady calm that masked the fear in her heart. "Derek, look. Someone is in the sky responding to our signals. We need to maintain altitude and speed. Do not panic." Derek's hands trembled slightly over the controls. "I've never seen anything like this," he said, swallowing hard. "The autopilot, it's reacting to something external." Sophie leaned closer to the tablet, her young mind calculating. She had spent countless hours watching videos on flight systems, memorizing emergency protocols, and playing flight simulators that no child should master so quickly. Yet here, in the middle of the sky, she was using that knowledge to keep hundreds of lives from plunging into disaster. Her gaze flicked up at the jets above. "They're listening. We have to guide them," she whispered. The F-22s moved into formation alongside Flight 782. Hayes's eyes were locked on the cockpit of the Boeing, trying to catch a glimpse of the child. "She's tiny," he muttered. "How is she doing this?" Ellison shook his head. "I don't know, but whatever she's doing, it's keeping the plane steady. Look at the autopilot inputs. They're subtle but perfect." Inside the cabin, passengers were oblivious to the fact that military jets were now shadowing their flight. They only sensed the tension in the air, the unnatural silence, the occasional tremor, the strange way the plane seemed to glide through turbulence. Some whispered prayers, others gripped their armrests, and children clung to their parents, sensing the weight of the unknown. Morno's eyes flicked between the instruments and the autopilot display. Something was influencing the plane's behavior in real time, making corrections she hadn't authorized. She frowned. "Derek, do you see that? The autopilot, it's following commands from outside the cockpit." Derek swallowed hard. "It's impossible. Whoever or whatever is doing this is accurate, too accurate to be human." Sophie's tablet pinged softly. She had sent a final confirmation to the F-22s, a signal that ensured they understood the full gravity of the situation. Hayes froze as the message came through, the clarity shocking him. A child, a civilian child, was effectively coordinating with military jets, guiding a commercial plane. "We're witnessing something unreal," Hayes whispered, his voice tight. Suddenly, Flight 782 shuddered violently. The autopilot responded almost instantaneously, adjusting the plane's tilt and banking to compensate for turbulence that seemed unnaturally strong. Morno fought to stabilize the yoke, sweat beading on her forehead. "We're holding," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But this is no ordinary turbulence." Sophie's fingers moved rapidly over the tablet, sending micro-adjustments. "Hold left slightly more now," she whispered, her eyes flicking between the sky outside and the signals on the screen. The plane responded instantly. The cabin rocked again, passengers gasping as coffee cups toppled and some screamed. But the plane leveled, unnaturally precise, guided by the smallest hands in the air. In the F-22s, Hayes and Ellison mirrored the Boeing's movements, careful not to collide. "It's like she's piloting from the back of the plane," Hayes muttered. "Every micro-adjustment, every minor correction, she's doing it all in real time. And we're the backup." Ellison swallowed. "Backup. We're watching a child direct a commercial aircraft under conditions that would overwhelm any experienced pilot." Morno's eyes flicked toward the cabin cameras, noticing the small figure of Sophie hunched over her tablet, calm and resolute. Her heart skipped a beat. Could a child really be doing this? And if so, how had she learned so much? She took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. "Derek, trust her. Follow the plane's guidance, but don't override." Derek nodded, uncertainty etched across his face. Sophie's mother, Claire, leaned closer. "Honey, are you sure you can do this?" Sophie's gaze met hers. "I have to. There's no other choice." Claire's hand shook, but she didn't pull back. Somehow, she understood that her daughter was the only thing standing between everyone on board and disaster. The F-22 pilots above held their formation, eyes wide with disbelief. Hayes's finger hovered over the communications button, but he didn't speak. No words could describe what was happening. They were watching a child in action, the impossible unfolding in real time. Every maneuver, every adjustment from Flight 782's autopilot was guided by her. Suddenly, a warning alarm blinked in the cockpit. Morno's heart leapt. "Derek, check it." Derek's hands flew over the controls. The alarm was subtle, a minor pressure drop, a fluctuation in cabin oxygen levels, but it was enough to terrify the unprepared. Sophie noticed it immediately. Her fingers flew across the tablet again, inputting corrective sequences she didn't fully understand but instinctively knew. "Hold altitude, stabilize pressure now," she whispered. The plane responded, the shudder passing, and the cabin fell eerily silent once more. Passengers, unaware of the near disaster, exhaled in relief. Morno leaned back for a moment, catching her breath. "This is beyond comprehension," she whispered to herself. Sophie, though exhausted, remained focused. She glanced at the jets above. "They're waiting for me," she whispered. "They're listening. I have to keep going." Hayes and Ellison in the F-22s mirrored the Boeing's every micro-movement, astonished. Hayes's heart pounded. She's controlling them, not just communicating, controlling. Every adjustment we're making, she's anticipating. She's guiding the plane. Ellison's jaw tightened. "We need to follow her lead, and fast, because if she slips, everyone down there dies." Back in the cabin, passengers continued their uneasy routines. Some nodded off in nervous exhaustion, others clutched seatbacks, unaware that a single child held the fate of 185 lives in her hands. Sophie's mother could only watch, a mixture of fear and awe in her eyes. She whispered a silent prayer, her faith anchored entirely in her daughter's ability to keep them alive. Morno's voice trembled slightly. "Derek, as she's doing it, she's actually doing it." Derek swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the instruments. "I don't know how, but she's right. Every input, she's saving this plane." And far above the Rockies, the two F-22s hovered in formation, frozen in awe and disbelief. A child, a single 11-year-old, had just taken control of Flight 782 in ways no adult could. Hayes muttered almost to himself, "We've never seen anything like this, and somehow we're following her lead." The plane continued onward, gliding through the sky as if guided by some invisible hand. Passengers felt the turbulence settle, the strange calm returning, unaware that the smallest passenger aboard was now the most important pilot in the sky. And Sophie, calm but determined, whispered softly, "We're not just flying, we're surviving, and they're listening." The morning sun glittered across the peaks of the Rockies, casting sharp shadows through Flight 782's cabin. Outside the windows, the clouds were scattered, harmless to anyone who hadn't just witnessed a silent crisis at 30,000 feet. Inside, the tension was palpable. Every passenger felt it, even if they didn't understand why. The plane moved smoothly now, almost unnervingly so, as if guided by some unseen hand. Sophie's mother, Claire, could hardly breathe. Her daughter, small and delicate, was hunched over her tablet with a precision and confidence that made Claire's own training in crisis situations feel irrelevant. "Sophie, what's happening?" she asked again, voice quivering. Sophie didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were locked on the tablet, scanning lines of data that resembled hieroglyphs to anyone else. "I know what to do," she whispered finally, as if speaking aloud might break the spell. In the cockpit, Captain Morno's brow was furrowed, a sheen of sweat glistening on her forehead. "Derek, she's predicting system fluctuations before they even happen," she said under her breath. Derek Shaw shook his head, disbelief etched into every line of his face. "How is that possible?" he whispered. Morno's hands gripped the yoke tightly. "I don't know, but she's keeping this plane alive." The passengers continued to whisper, some speculating, others praying. A little boy clutched his stuffed dinosaur, staring out the window. "Mom, why's it so quiet?" he asked. His mother shook her head, unable to explain the silence of the cockpit, the unnatural smoothness of the ride, the strange calm emanating from the girl in seat 14C. Sophie's fingers danced over her tablet. She wasn't just inputting data, she was calculating, predicting, reacting. Years of watching her father troubleshoot flight systems had given her a foundation that now seemed almost supernatural. Every command she sent, every code she executed, influenced the autopilot in subtle ways that Morno and Derek could barely track in real time. Far above, the F-22s mirrored the Boeing's movements, their pilots watching with wide eyes. Hayes and Ellison had never experienced anything like this. Hayes's hand hovered over the comms. "We need to intervene," he asked, though even he doubted he wanted the answer. "Not yet," Ellison said. "She's doing fine. She's guiding them." But both men were tense, aware that one miscalculation could spell disaster for the 185 souls aboard the Boeing. Sophie's mind raced. She detected small anomalies, slight lags in hydraulic pressure, micro fluctuations in engine response, that could turn catastrophic if left uncorrected. She sent rapid, precise inputs to the autopilot, her young brain executing commands far beyond what any civilian pilot might attempt. Each micro-adjustment stabilized the plane further, keeping it level and steady despite the subtle chaos threatening to erupt. Morno's voice broke the tense silence of the cockpit. "Derek, look at the system's readout. It's almost like someone is predicting the plane's movements in real time." Derek's hands hovered over the panel, unsure whether to touch anything. "She's controlling it?" he asked, disbelief in his tone. Morno swallowed hard. "Not just controlling, guiding, anticipating, she's keeping us alive." Claire's heart raced. She gripped Sophie's shoulder, feeling the steady pulse of determination in her daughter. "Sophie, please tell me you know what you're doing," she whispered. Sophie didn't break concentration. "Mom, we're not going down. Not today." Her small hands moved with precision and confidence that made her mother's fear turn into awe. Suddenly, the plane jolted slightly, a micro-turbulence so subtle that most passengers barely noticed, but enough to make Morno tighten her grip. The autopilot adjusted automatically, but Sophie's hands were already at work. "Left rudder slightly more, trim the stabilizers," she whispered, almost chanting. The plane responded instantly. Morno's eyes widened. Derek's jaw dropped. This child was performing tasks that usually required years of training. The F-22s above adjusted to the Boeing's movements with exacting precision. Hayes whispered, disbelief tinged with awe. "Every correction she makes, we follow. Every micro-input, she's thinking 3 steps ahead." Ellison nodded silently. "We're just observers, and if she slips, we're too late." In the cabin, passengers noticed the calmness in Sophie's demeanor, contrasting sharply with their own rising anxiety. Some glanced at her curiously. A flight attendant approached, nervously, and whispered, "Honey, what are you doing?" Sophie didn't answer, only continued to manipulate her tablet. Her small frame was tense, focused, every fiber of her being directed toward one goal, keeping the plane and everyone aboard alive. Suddenly, an alert blinked on the cockpit screen, an irregularity in the engine output. Morno's eyes widened. "Derek, check the engines, now." Derek's hands moved quickly, but he was too late. The anomaly was subtle, creeping in faster than he could react. Sophie noticed immediately. Her fingers flew over her tablet. "Increase throttle slightly, stabilize fuel mixture now," the autopilot responded, and the subtle threat vanished as quickly as it appeared. High above, Hayes and Ellison held their formation tighter. "She saw that before it happened," Hayes muttered, jaw tight. How is she predicting system failures like that?" Ellison shook his head. "I don't know. She's not just guiding the plane, she's controlling it. From the back of the cabin, a kid." Sophie's mother's hand shook as she held onto her daughter. "Sophie, you can't, you're just a kid." Sophie's eyes met her mother's, steady and unflinching. "Mom, we don't have a choice. I have to do this." Morno's voice cracked slightly as she glanced at the cabin cameras. The small figure of Sophie hunched over her tablet seemed impossibly calm in the chaos, her movements deliberate and precise. "Derek, look at her. She's saving us," Morno whispered. Derek's eyes widened. I can't believe it. A child. Suddenly the plane lurched violently. A turbulence burst, sharper than the previous microjolt. Passengers screamed. Coffee cups flew, a laptop toppled, and some clutched the seatbacks in fear. Morno fought to stabilize the yoke. "Brace for turbulence," she shouted. But even as the plane rocked, Sophie's fingers moved with speed and clarity, sending rapid corrective commands. "Hold steady now," she whispered, almost as if speaking to the plane itself. The plane responded immediately, leveling as if under the control of some invisible hand. Passengers were unaware of the extraordinary events unfolding around them. All they sensed was the terrifying jolt, followed by an almost supernatural calm. The F-22 pilots above were frozen in awe. Hayes whispered, disbelief thick in his voice. She's doing this. Every adjustment, every correction she's predicting before the plane even reacts. A child," Ellison nodded. "And we're following her lead. If she miscalculates," he didn't finish. He didn't need to. They both knew the stakes. Sophie's mother gripped her shoulder, her knuckles white. "Honey, please be careful," she whispered. Sophie didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the tablet, reading data, sending signals, anticipating every fluctuation, every tremor, every hidden danger. She was calm, focused, terrifyingly competent for her age. Then another anomaly appeared, a minor warning in the hydraulic system. Morno's heart leapt. "Derek, check it." Derek's hands moved over the controls, but he froze. The anomaly was subtle but dangerous. Sophie noticed it instantly. Her small fingers flew across the tablet. "Adjust stabilizer's pressure balance now." The autopilot executed her commands flawlessly. The plane leveled again, smoother than ever. Passengers exhaled, unaware of how close they had come to disaster. Morno and Derek exchanged looks of disbelief. "I don't know how she's doing this," Derek muttered, "but she's keeping us alive." High above, Hayes whispered to himself, eyes wide. "We've never seen anything like this. And she's just a child," Ellison nodded. "We follow her lead, she's our best chance." Sophie glanced at the F-22s, their shadows briefly cutting across the clouds. "They're watching," she whispered. "They're listening. We're not alone." And in that moment, the world outside Flight 782's cabin seemed to hold its breath. One child, small and determined, held the lives of 185 passengers in her hands, and the F-22s above, frozen in awe, knew that this was no ordinary flight. The calm was temporary. The challenges ahead were immense, and Sophie, unshaken, whispered softly, "We're just getting started." Flight 782 moved through the sky with an unsettling smoothness. To the untrained eye, the Boeing seemed perfectly stable, but anyone paying attention could sense the hidden struggle. Passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, murmuring softly, clutching armrests, or glancing nervously at the overhead compartments as the plane rocked ever so slightly. The silence of the cockpit only intensified their anxiety. The seatbelt sign flickered ominously, casting intermittent shadows across pale, worried faces. Sophie's small fingers flew over her tablet with unwavering precision. Every input she sent influenced the autopilot in a subtle but vital way, stabilizing the plane in the face of minor turbulence. The cabin lurched briefly, sending a coffee cup tumbling from an overhead tray, and passengers cried out in alarm. Yet Sophie's calm was unshakable, her young mind scanning systems, anticipating shifts, calculating solutions before problems could fully manifest. "Hold it steady." "Now," she whispered under her breath, her voice barely audible. Captain Morno's knuckles whitened on the yoke. Derek watched the adjustments. "They're too precise for autopilot alone." Derek's eyes widened as he observed the subtle microcorrections flowing through the system. She's predicting them," he muttered. "A child at predicting system failures before they happen." Morno's breath caught in her throat. She had flown countless emergencies, but nothing had prepared her for this. A child was orchestrating the survival of hundreds of passengers, with a combination of instinct, knowledge, and something beyond logic. The passengers were beginning to notice the unusual calm emanating from Sophie. A flight attendant leaned close, her voice trembling. "Sweetheart, what are you doing?" Sophie didn't respond. Her attention remained fixed on the tablet, where lines of code and flight sequences danced across the screen. She was calculating the plane's next moves with uncanny foresight. Every micro-adjustment, every subtle correction, was designed to counteract turbulence, system anomalies, and the unknown threats the plane now faced. The turbulence intensified suddenly, more violent than before. The plane shuddered, dropping slightly before the autopilot attempted to stabilize it. Morno's heart raced as she fought to maintain control. "Brace for turbulence," she shouted to the passengers, but Sophie was already responding. Her fingers darted across the tablet, sending rapid commands. "Rudder trim slightly more left, increase stabilizer response," she whispered, and the plane leveled almost instantaneously, the terrifying jolt absorbed as if by magic. High above, the F-22s mirrored every move. Hayes and Ellison exchanged incredulous glances. "Every input she makes we're following," Hayes muttered. "Every correction she anticipates it before it happens." Ellison's jaw tightened. "We're backup. She's guiding the plane, controlling its micro-movements, and we're just trying to keep up. And she's a child." Sophie's eyes flicked toward the jets above. Their shadows briefly streaked across the clouds below. "They're watching. They're listening," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. She adjusted her commands accordingly, ensuring that Flight 782 remained level and steady despite the increasingly erratic turbulence. Her mind worked faster than any adult pilot's could, blending instinct with technical knowledge in a way that seemed almost superhuman. Suddenly, a sharp warning flashed on the cockpit screen. Morno gasped. "Hydraulic pressure fluctuating," she said. Derek's hands flew over the controls, but he hesitated, unsure how to respond. Sophie noticed immediately. Her fingers danced across the tablet, entering a sequence of microcorrections that stabilized the system before anyone in the cockpit could react. "Pressure stable, hold steady," she whispered. The plane responded flawlessly. Morno stared at the screens, disbelief etched across her face. In the cabin, passengers clung to one another. Coffee spilled, a small child whimpered, and a businessman cursed under his breath as his laptop skidded across the aisle. But the plane remained on course, unnaturally stable despite the chaos. Some of the passengers began to sense that someone, or something, was orchestrating the outcome of the flight. Claire Callahan, Sophie's mother, gripped her daughter's shoulder, heart pounding. "Sophie, you're doing this?" she asked, voice barely audible. Sophie's eyes met hers, calm and resolute. "I have to. Everyone depends on it," she whispered. The gravity of the situation seemed to deepen the connection between mother and daughter. Claire felt both terror and awe in equal measure, realizing that Sophie was no longer just a child. She was the pilot, the guardian of their lives at 30,000 feet. Suddenly, another turbulence wave hit, stronger than the last. Passengers screamed as the plane lurched violently. Morno's voice rang out over the intercom. "Brace, brace!" But Sophie had already anticipated the movement. Her fingers flew over her tablet, adjusting rudder trim, stabilizer input, and autopilot microcorrections simultaneously. The plane leveled within seconds, passengers gasping in shock, unaware that their survival depended on the smallest hands aboard. The F-22s above moved in tighter formation, scanning the plane for anomalies. Hayes whispered under his breath, disbelief and fear mixing in equal measure. "She's controlling them, predicting every movement. She's guiding the plane." Ellison shook his head. "We're following her. If she slips, we're too late." Morno glanced at the cabin cameras, seeing Sophie hunched over her tablet, calm in the eye of a storm no one else could fully perceive. "Derek, we have to trust her," she said, almost to herself. Derek nodded, still pale but aware that resistance could be fatal. "Trust a child," he muttered. "I never thought I'd see the day." Another warning flashed, this time indicating a minor engine anomaly. Morno's heart leapt. "Derek, look!" Derek's hands flew over the controls, but Sophie had already taken action. Her small fingers tapped rapidly across the tablet, adjusting throttle input and stabilizing the engine response before the anomaly could escalate. The plane responded perfectly, the engines humming smoothly once more. Passengers felt the turbulence dissipate, a strange calm settling over the cabin. Some exhaled in relief, unaware of how close they had come to disaster. Others whispered prayers, sensing the intensity of what had just passed but unable to comprehend it fully. High above, Hayes and Ellison held their formation, eyes wide with disbelief. Hayes muttered, "Every adjustment, every prediction, she's controlling it. From the back of a commercial plane. A child." Ellison nodded, silent, knowing that words could not capture the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Sophie glanced once more at the jets above. "They're here," she whispered. "They're listening. We're not alone." Her voice was steady, even in the face of overwhelming pressure. Morneau glanced back at the cabin cameras, noticing the determination etched on Sophie's face. For the first time, she realized that this child might not just be guiding the plane, she might be saving everyone aboard. The turbulence faded, leaving only a tense, almost surreal calm. Passengers adjusted in their seats, whispering nervously. The engines hummed steadily. Morneau exhaled, her hands still tight on the yoke. Derek's face was pale but focused, eyes glued to the instruments. And Sophie, small and determined, continued to send precise commands, keeping the plane stable, aware, and alive. And far above, the F-22s hovered in formation, frozen in awe and disbelief. Hayes whispered almost to himself, "We've never seen anything like this, and she's just a child." Ellison's eyes were fixed on the Boeing. "We follow her. She's the only reason they're alive." The sky held its breath. Every heartbeat aboard Flight 782 was synchronized with Sophie's steady, unflinching focus. One small girl, with her tablet and determination, had become the most important pilot in the air. And Sophie, calm and resolute, whispered softly, "We're not just surviving, we're winning." Flight 782 soared through the clear blue sky, but calm was a dangerous illusion. The turbulence had passed for now, but Morneau's eyes never left the instruments. Her jaw was tight, her pulse racing. "Derek, check all systems. Every gauge, every sensor," she instructed. Derek's hands moved over the controls with precision, but the tension in the cockpit was palpable. Even minor anomalies could become catastrophic at any moment. Sophie's fingers flew across her tablet, adjusting microcorrections, monitoring the plane's stability and predicting every fluctuation. "We're stable for now," she whispered to herself. Her eyes flicked toward the windows, scanning the sky. She could feel it, a presence that wasn't turbulence, wasn't mechanical failure. Something else was out there, something invisible, testing her control, testing the plane's limits. Claire noticed the sudden tightening in Sophie's jaw. "Honey, what is it?" she asked, fear lacing her voice. Sophie didn't answer immediately. Her small hands danced over the tablet, issuing rapid-fire corrections to the autopilot. "Mom's something coming, something we can't see." The words hung in the air, a chilling warning Claire didn't fully understand. High above, the F-22s adjusted formation. Hayes and Ellison had been monitoring Flight 782 closely since recognizing the child's call sign. Now, a new alert flashed across their cockpit screens, unusual radar interference, faint but significant, emanating from no identifiable source. Hayes swallowed hard. "We're not alone up here," he muttered. Ellison's jaw tightened. "Something's tracking the Boeing." In the cabin, passengers were oblivious to the invisible threat creeping through the sky. A businessman muttered into his phone, frustrated at dropped signals. A mother comforted her young son, unaware that a single girl held the fate of everyone aboard in her hands. Sophie's mother, Claire, gripped her daughter's hand, sensing the tension, feeling it resonate in her chest. "Sophie, what is it?" she whispered. Sophie didn't look up. Her focus was absolute. The autopilot shuddered slightly, subtle enough for most adults to miss, but Sophie detected it immediately. "Something's interfering. Hold the plane steady. Increase stabilizer response now," she commanded, her voice a low, urgent whisper. The plane responded, leveling almost too perfectly. Morneau's brow furrowed in confusion. The autopilot, we're stable again. How is that possible? Derek muttered. It's almost like someone or something is assisting. Above, the F-22 pilots watched in disbelief as the Boeing seemed to dance through invisible turbulence. Hayes muttered under his breath, "She's handling it. She's compensating for something we can't even see." Ellison shook his head. "We're just following, and if she miscalculates, we're too late." Suddenly, Flight 782 shuddered violently. A burst of interference that wasn't turbulence, not engine failure, not anything mechanical. The plane rocked, passengers screamed, and drinks spilled across trays. Morneau shouted, "Brace! Brace!" But Sophie had already predicted the movement. Her small fingers moved over the tablet with blinding speed. "Rudder left to trim, stabilizers compensate pressure," she whispered. The plane leveled instantly, and the cabin fell silent except for shallow breaths and whispered prayers. Claire gripped Sophie tightly. "Honey, please don't let it." Sophie's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "Mom, we're okay. We're fine. Just keep holding on." Her words were a mantra, a quiet promise that gave Claire a sliver of hope amid terror. Morneau and Derek exchanged glances, both pale but realizing that the girl in the cabin was guiding the plane with precision that defied logic. "Derek, this is impossible," Morneau whispered. "A child is controlling autopilot micro-adjustments better than I've ever seen." Derek shook his head, voice trembling. "We're not controlling it, she is." Suddenly, another alert appeared, more pronounced this time, subtle electromagnetic interference affecting navigation systems. Morneau's eyes widened. "Derek's systems are glitching. We're losing stability." Derek's hands flew over the controls, but Sophie's fingers had already predicted the disturbance. "Input override, stabilize navigation. Hold altitude now," she whispered. The plane responded immediately, the autopilot compensating as though it were a natural extension of her commands. The passengers, still unaware of the invisible threat above, began whispering among themselves. "Did you feel that?" one asked. "It felt wrong," muttered another. Sophie's mother could only clutch her daughter's hand, awe and terror interwoven. The girl who had saved them before was now facing something beyond comprehension, something no adult could see, yet that threatened them all. High above, the F-22 pilots followed the Boeing's movements with growing alarm. Hayes's voice was tight. "She's predicting interference before it even hits. She's seeing it, reacting to it, and keeping everyone alive. And we can't see it." Ellison swallowed hard. "We're just observers. If she falters, we're too late." Sophie's eyes flicked toward the jet formation above. "They're here," she whispered. "They're watching. They'll help if needed." Her fingers danced over the tablet again, compensating for fluctuations in stability, microturbulence, and invisible interference. Every input was precise, deliberate, and life-saving. Suddenly, the plane lurched violently again, stronger than any previous disturbance. Morneau shouted, "Brace for impact." But there was no impact. Instead, subtle systems began to react oddly, as though the Boeing itself were fighting against an invisible force. Sophie's fingers flew across the tablet, inputting corrections faster than anyone could follow. "Stabilize, adjust, rudder, increase autopilot compensation." The plane leveled with precision, astonishing even the seasoned pilots in the cockpit. The F-22s mirrored every movement of Flight 782. Hayes whispered, disbelief thick in his voice. "She's controlling the plane in real time, anticipating every interference. A child guiding a Boeing through invisible threats." Ellison's eyes were wide. "We follow her. She's the only reason they're alive." Sophie's mother whispered, voice trembling, "Honey, you're amazing. You're saving us." Sophie gave a small nod, her eyes still locked on the tablet. "Mom, we're not done. We have to stay ahead." The weight of responsibility pressed against her small frame, but she bore it with a maturity far beyond her years. Morneau glanced at the cabin cameras, noticing Sophie's calm determination. She's saving everyone," she whispered. Derek's face was pale but resolute. "We're just following her lead, and we pray we don't interfere." The turbulence subsided slightly, leaving an eerie calm in the cabin. Passengers adjusted their positions, whispering softly. The engines hummed smoothly. Sophie's eyes flicked to the sky above, her small body tense with awareness. She knew the invisible threat wasn't gone, it was waiting, testing her patience, her skill, her focus. High above, Hayes's voice was barely audible. "We've never seen anything like this. And she's just a child." Ellison nodded silently. "We follow her. If she falters, we're too late." Sophie whispered to herself, small but resolute, "We're not just surviving, we're fighting." And they're listening. The sky seemed to hold its breath. One small girl, armed with nothing but knowledge, intuition, and determination, held the lives of 185 passengers in her hands. And the invisible threat above was just beginning its test. Flight 782 cut through the upper atmosphere, its wings slicing through thin air like knives. The morning sun glinted off the fuselage, painting sharp reflections across the cabin windows. Everything seemed calm, too calm, but everyone aboard knew better. Passengers were tense, shifting in their seats, gripping armrests, whispering prayers, or trying to make sense of the subtle vibrations and tiny microlurches in the plane. The quiet terror was palpable. Sophie's fingers moved over her tablet with relentless precision. Her mind was a whirl of calculations, autopilot inputs, rudder adjustments, stabilizer trims, throttle commands. Every microcorrection she made was to counteract the invisible force still testing the plane, a threat no one could see or predict. "Hold steady, anticipate," she whispered under her breath. Her small body hunched over, entirely consumed by the responsibility that had been thrust upon her. Claire Callahan, Sophie's mother, held her daughter's hand tightly. Her knuckles were white. "Sophie, please, we ca." Sophie's eyes met her mother, calm, determined. "Mom, we can, we have to. Everyone's counting on us." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. Her daughter wasn't just a child, she was a guardian, a pilot, and the only barrier between life and catastrophe. In the cockpit, Captain Morneau's hands gripped the yoke until her knuckles ached. Derek Shaw's eyes darted between screens, instruments, and autopilot readouts. "Every system, everything looks normal, yet it isn't," Derek muttered, voice tight with fear. Morneau exhaled slowly. "She's guiding us, predicting micro-fluctuations that don't exist yet. How is that possible?" Above, the F-22s followed every subtle maneuver of the Boeing. Hayes and Ellison were silent, their expressions frozen with awe. "Every movement, every microcorrection, she's anticipating it before it even happens," Hayes whispered. Ellison swallowed hard. "And we're just following. If she falters, we're too late." The two jets maintained formation, eyes scanning for the invisible threat, instruments humming, radar flickering at minor anomalies they couldn't identify. Suddenly, Flight 782 jolted violently. The invisible threat had escalated, a subtle, oscillating interference affecting flight controls. Passengers screamed, coffee and papers flying. Morneau shouted, "Brace for turbulence." Derek's hands flew over the yoke, but Sophie was already at work. Her fingers moved faster than anyone could see. "Rudder left trim, stabilizers correct, engine output now," she whispered. The plane responded immediately. The jolt passed, leaving passengers gasping in confusion. Most had no idea what had nearly occurred. Sophie exhaled, eyes fixed on the tablet. "Almost too close," she whispered. Her fingers hovered over the screen, anticipating the next surge, the next test, the next invisible challenge. Claire watched, heart in her throat. "Sophie, how are you doing this?" she asked softly. Sophie's small frame tensed. "I've studied this, remembered everything my dad taught me, and now I just feel it. The plane, the turbulence, the interference, it's all connected." Her calm, measured voice belied the storm of fear, concentration, and determination inside her. Morneau's voice broke the tense silence. "Derek, she's stabilizing systems that should be failing, and she's doing it instinctively." Derek shook his head, pale. "I've flown thousands of hours. This is beyond any emergency protocol I've ever seen. She's controlling the plane." The turbulence surged again, sharper this time. The plane lurched violently, passengers screaming and gripping seatbacks. Morneau shouted, "Brace, brace!" But Sophie's fingers moved faster than thought itself. "Stabilizers up, rudder trim right, compensate engine thrust now," she commanded. The plane leveled instantly. The cabin fell into an eerie calm, the chaos absorbed as if by magic. Above, Hayes and Ellison's jaws dropped. Every single movement, we're following her lead. She's predicting everything before it happens. Ellison's voice was tight. "We're not controlling the situation, she is." Sophie's eyes flicked to the F-22s. "They're watching, listening. They'll help if needed," she whispered, inputting a sequence that coordinated autopilot micro-adjustments with the jet's proximity. Each command was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it synchronized perfectly with the military pilot's maneuvers. Suddenly, another anomaly appeared, subtle electromagnetic interference affecting navigation systems. Morneau gasped. "Derek's systems are glitching. We're losing stability." Derek's hands moved over the controls, but Sophie was faster. "Override autopilot, correct rudder drift, stabilize navigation, now," she whispered. The plane responded immediately, leveling with a precision that seemed impossible. Passengers noticed only a brief jolt and a strange calm afterward. Whispered prayers floated through the cabin. Claire gripped Sophie's hand, awestruck. "Honey, you're incredible," she whispered. Sophie gave a small nod. "We have to stay ahead," she replied, her voice steady, calm, and determined. High above, Hayes muttered, disbelief thick in his tone. "She's guiding us, anticipating threats before we can even detect them." Ellison nodded. "And we follow. She's our only chance to keep them alive." The invisible interference intensified. Flight 782 lurched again, passengers screaming in terror. Morneau yelled, "Brace! Brace for turbulence!" Derek's hands flew over the yoke, but Sophie was already predicting the movement, calculating, adjusting. "Rudder left, trim stabilizers, engine thrust correct, hold altitude," she whispered. The plane leveled, unnaturally precise. Claire's heart pounded. She clutched Sophie's hand, her voice trembling. "Honey, you can't keep doing this." Sophie's eyes met hers, unwavering. I have to. Everyone's counting on me." Morneau's hands gripped the yoke as she glanced at the cabin cameras. Sophie's small figure, hunched over her tablet, calm in the chaos, was orchestrating every micro-adjustment with skill and focus that defied her age. Derek muttered, "We're not controlling it, she is." Above, the F-22 pilots held formation, eyes wide with disbelief. Hayes whispered almost to himself, a child guiding a Boeing through invisible threats, anticipating every fluctuation before it happens. Ellison's eyes were locked on the plane. "We follow her. If she falters, everyone dies." Another sudden surge hit the plane, stronger, sharper, more aggressive. Passengers screamed, coffee and laptops flying, children crying. Morneau shouted, "Brace! Brace!" Sophie's small hands moved over the tablet, sending precise, life-saving commands. "Stabilizers up, rudder trim, engine output adjust, hold steady," she whispered. The plane responded flawlessly. Cabin chaos subsided. Passengers, unaware of the invisible forces at play, exhaled in relief. Claire squeezed her daughter's hand. "Honey, you're amazing." Sophie's small nod betrayed her fatigue but not her determination. "We're not done," she whispered. High above, Hayes and Ellison tracked every micro-movement. Hayes muttered, voice tight, "She's doing it. Controlling autopilot, anticipating interference, a child." Ellison's jaw tightened. "We're following her lead. She's the only reason they're alive." The invisible threat paused, almost as if recognizing the girl's command over the plane. Sophie's eyes flicked to the sky above. "They're listening. We're not alone," she whispered. Every system, every input, every micro-adjustment was perfectly timed, every calculation executed flawlessly. The cabin settled into a tense calm. Engines hummed smoothly. Passengers whispered prayers, some wondering at the eerie quiet. Morneau's hand still gripped the yoke, sweat beading on her forehead. Derek's face was pale but resolute, and Sophie, small, determined, and unwavering, continued to guide them through the invisible storm above. And Sophie whispered softly to herself, the weight of the world pressing down on her small shoulders. We're not just surviving, we're winning. And they're listening. Flight 782 hung in the sky like a fragile thread stretched across the heavens. The sun had climbed higher, scattering light over the jagged Rockies below, yet the peace of morning was deceptive. The invisible interference, the mysterious force testing the plane, was back, stronger, more unpredictable. Morno's hands gripped the yoke as though letting go would mean instant disaster. Derek Shaw's face was pale, jaw tight, eyes scanning instruments in a desperate rhythm. The Boeing was at the mercy of forces no one could fully perceive except for one small girl. Sophie leaned over her tablet, every muscle in her small body taut with concentration. She had been at this for hours now, guiding the plane, predicting fluctuations, countering invisible threats. Her mind moved faster than anyone else's could, blending instinct, intuition, and technical knowledge into a seamless command of Flight 782. She could feel the plane's heartbeat, the micro-vibrations of its wings, the subtle pressure changes that no adult pilot could detect in time. Claire Callahan gripped her daughter's hand with a mixture of fear and awe. "Sophie, please, we're so close," she whispered. Sophie's eyes met her mother's, calm, resolute, fierce. "Mom, just trust me. We can do this." Her voice was small, but it carried a gravity and authority that belied her age. Claire could only nod, tears blurring her vision. The F-22s maintained formation above, their pilots frozen in disbelief and tension. Hayes whispered to Ellison, voice tight. "She's controlling every micro-adjustment, predicting fluctuations before they occur. She's keeping them alive." Ellison's jaw tightened. "We're just observers. If she falters, everyone dies." Suddenly, Flight 782 lurched violently, stronger than anything before. The invisible interference struck like a phantom hammer, shaking the plane and sending passengers screaming. Coffee, drinks, and small objects flew through the cabin. Morno's voice cut through the chaos. "Brace! Brace for turbulence!" Derek's hands flew over the yoke, but they were one step behind the unseen force. Sophie's fingers moved faster than thought itself. Every microcorrection was executed with flawless precision. "Stabilizers up, rudder trim, engine output adjust, hold altitude steady," she whispered. The Boeing responded as if guided by an invisible hand. The passengers' screams turned into gasps of astonishment as the violent shaking ceased almost instantly. Claire's grip on Sophie tightened. "Honey, how are you doing this?" Sophie's gaze flicked to her mother. "I feel it, Mom. The plane, the air, the interference, it's all connected. I just know what to do." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of wisdom beyond her years. Morno's eyes were wide, disbelief etched across her face. "Derek, she's controlling autopilot better than any pilot I've ever known, and she's a child." Derek swallowed hard, voice trembling. "We're not controlling the plane, she is, and we follow." The turbulence surged again, even stronger this time, threatening to throw the plane off course. Passengers screamed, clinging to each other and their seats. Sophie's small hands danced across the tablet, issuing a sequence of corrections faster than anyone could track. "Adjust, trim, increase stabilizer response. Rudder left, engine thrust compensate now," she whispered. The plane leveled perfectly. Morno exhaled, realizing that the child in seat 14C had done the impossible. She had stabilized Flight 782 through the most violent interference it had faced yet. Derek's jaw dropped. "I don't understand how she's doing this. We would have lost control." High above, Hayes and Ellison mirrored the Boeing's every movement. Hayes whispered, voice tight, "She's guiding the plane, predicting turbulence we can't see. A child." Ellison's eyes were wide. "We follow her lead. She's the only reason they're alive." Sophie glanced at the F-22s above. "They're watching, listening," she whispered. She inputted a new sequence to sync autopilot micro-adjustments with the jet's positions. Every movement of Flight 782 became coordinated with the F-22s, creating an invisible safety net that even the interference couldn't overcome. The interference flared one last time, violent and erratic, testing Sophie's limits. Morno shouted over the intercom, "Brace! Brace!" Passengers screamed, gripping seatbacks as the plane tilted sharply. Sophie's small body tensed, eyes scanning data, predicting, correcting, commanding. Her fingers flew across the tablet. Rudder right, stabilizer up, engine thrust, balance, hold steady. The plane leveled instantly, as though responding to a guardian angel. Passengers gasped, some staring at Sophie with wide eyes, sensing that this small girl had just saved them all. Morno's face reflected awe and disbelief. Derek muttered under his breath, "A child piloting a Boeing better than any of us ever could." Claire's eyes welled with tears. "Honey, you did it, you saved us." Sophie's small nod was almost imperceptible. "Not yet, we still have to land." Morno took a deep breath, voice steadier now. "Derek, she's done the impossible. Let's focus on landing." Derek nodded. Sophie's input continued to guide every micro-adjustment, smoothing out turbulence, compensating for minor wind shifts, keeping the plane perfectly aligned with the approach path. The F-22s maintained a protective formation, scanning for hazards, communicating silently, mirroring Flight 782's movements. Hayes whispered, awestruck, "We're escorting a child guiding a Boeing through forces we can't even detect. This is unbelievable." Ellison nodded silently, gripping the controls. "We're following her lead. If she miscalculates, we're too late." The airport came into view. The runway stretched like a lifeline across the valley. The wind gusts over the mountains were tricky, threatening to throw the plane off balance. Morno's hands gripped the yoke. "Derek, we follow her inputs exactly. No improvising." Derek nodded, trusting the child who had orchestrated their survival. Sophie's fingers moved over the tablet, entering sequences to manage descent speed, throttle adjustments, and final alignment. "Descend slowly, stabilize altitude, trim rudder, hold steady," she whispered. Her small frame hunched over the tablet, every ounce of focus on the task. The passengers sensed the calm authority emanating from her. The plane descended smoothly, aligned perfectly with the runway. Morno whispered, "She's guiding the approach better than any co-pilot I've ever flown with." Derek's hands remained on the instruments, following Sophie's precise commands. Hayes and Ellison, flying overhead, watched in awe as the Boeing's micro-adjustments kept it perfectly stable. As the wheels touched down, passengers erupted in cheers, tears streaming down faces, some clapping, others hugging loved ones. The plane rolled along the runway, slowing, stabilized, alive. Morno exhaled, hands shaking. We made it," Derek muttered, "and a child did it." Claire grabbed Sophie's hand, holding it tightly. "Honey, you saved everyone." We," Sophie smiled, exhausted but proud. "Mom, we did it. We're okay." The reality of what had just occurred began to sink in. A small girl, 11 years old, had guided Flight 782 through invisible interference, turbulence, and emergency scenarios, saving 185 lives. High above, Hayes and Ellison followed the Boeing as it taxied to the gate. Hayes whispered, awe-filled, "We've never seen anything like this, and she's just a child." Ellison nodded silently. "We follow her lead. She's the reason they're alive." As passengers disembarked, media crews swarmed the tarmac. Reporters clamored for interviews. Everyone wanted to know who had guided Flight 782 through what could only be described as impossible circumstances. Sophie, small and unassuming, held her mother's hand. The truth was simple. She had done the impossible, guided by courage, instinct, and unshakable determination. The story of Flight 782 would echo across news networks, social media, and history. A child had saved 185 lives, faced an invisible threat, and commanded a commercial Boeing better than most adults could ever dream. But for Sophie, it wasn't about fame. It was about responsibility, bravery, and the unwavering belief that she could, and would, save them all. And as the F-22s finally returned to base, pilots Hayes and Ellison remained silent, still processing what they had witnessed. One child had changed everything they thought possible in the skis. Sophie whispered softly to herself as the crowd cheered, holding her mother's hand. We survived it together, and they were listening.